Hello, good evening and welcome. And on a bitterly cold night, we are of course warmed by your presence at Broadcasting Scotland here at Scotland at 7. My name is Donald C Stewart and here are today's headlines. Of course, as always, we start with the Ukraine update on day 293 of the illegal war waged by Russia against Ukraine. And the news included that generators are as important as armour in helping Ukraine survive Vladimir Putin's energy terror this winter, Volodymyr Zelensky has said. Ukraine need an additional €800 million, which equates to £686 million to survive the winter, and a further €1.5 billion to restore the long-term damage to the energy grid. Its president told an emergency conference in Paris, which was convened to coordinate infrastructure and humanitarian aid to the country over the next 4 months. More than €1 billion was raised to support Ukraine this winter at the aid conference in Paris, France's Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna has said. The money, pledged by 46 countries and 24 international organisations, would be split between restoring Ukraine's depleted energy network, the food sector, water supply, health and transportation, Colonna said. Ukrainian forces have reportedly damaged a key bridge outside the southern city of Melitopol, a key objective for Kyiv in the region. Russia and Ukraine pounded each other's forces in heavy fighting in the eastern region of Donetsk today. And Germany will approve another €50 million in winter aid for Kyiv following Russia's missile attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, according to Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock. The head of Norway's Refugee Council said he expects another wave of hundreds of thousands of refugees from Ukraine to go to Europe over the winter because of unlivable conditions. The European Union reached a deal in principle to send an €18 billion financial aid package to Ukraine and approve a minimum tax on major corporations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged leaders of the Group of 7 nations on Monday to support his idea of convening a special global peace summit in winter dedicated to bringing peace to his country. The exiled mayor of Melitopol claims Russian troops are redeploying and panicking following Ukrainian attacks on the Russian-occupied city over the weekend. And Vadim Skibitsky, Ukraine's deputy head of military intelligence, has warned that Russia has enough missiles to launch another 3 to 5 waves of strikes on the country. 2 civilians have been injured and 2 civilians have been killed and 10 more injured after Russian rocket attacks on the town of Hernik in the Donetsk region in eastern Ukraine. United Kingdom Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said he would be open-minded about supplying Ukraine with longer-range weapons if Russians continued to target civilian areas. The European Union has secured enough gas for this winter, but could face a gas shortage next year if Russia further cuts supplies, the European Commission and the International Energy Agency have warned. And with news over the last few days in terms of a number of polls that have come out showing increased support for independence, domestically we now have the 4th poll in a row showing just exactly that, majority support for Scottish independence. Published by YouGov in the Times, it shows that 53% of those expressing an opinion would support independence. This is the 4th poll in a row since October showing a majority in favour of independence. A clear majority of people agreed that Holyrood should have the power to hold an independence referendum. SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown MSP commented that it is clear that the people of Scotland want their voice to be heard, and the longer Westminster continues to ignore us, the more support for independence will grow. More and more people in Scotland are looking at the utter incompetence of this Tory government and how the Labour Party has abandoned them to adopt a disastrous pro-Brexit policy, and realising that the only way Scotland can escape the long-term damage of Brexit and Westminster control is with independence. The people of Scotland, he continued, will simply not stand for the Westminster Party's Trump-like democracy denial. The people of Scotland have already voted for a referendum, meaning that now is the time for one, and politicians at Westminster must recognise that. It's clear, he said, that Scotland can flourish as an independent country in the European Union, and the people of Scotland deserve to have that choice over their future. And moving from Scotland and the polls up here down to Westminster, where Rishi Sunak has announced changes to the UK's asylum rules so that more applications can be refused. He told MPs his government will end the backlog of UK asylum claims by the end of 2023, with the number of outstanding claims sitting at the moment at more than 140,000. The Prime Minister was announcing a new set of aspirational policies designed to fix the UK's immigration system, including law changes to criminalise and then remove tens of thousands of people who claim asylum after travelling to the United Kingdom by small boat. He said he had signed an agreement with the Albanian government that would speed up the removal of recent arrivals from the Balkan country. He also claimed again that he would restart plans to deport people seeking refuge in the UK to Rwanda, a policy that is currently being challenged in the courts. He also promised to rewrite modern slavery laws, a promise that the former Prime Minister, Theresa May, warned might undermine protections for victims. In his address to the Commons, Sunak said the government pledged to tackle the backlogs clogging up the asylum system. But in response, Amnesty International's UK's Refugee and Migrant Rights Director responded to the announcements today by saying the Prime Minister's statement on asylum makes clear that he either doesn't have a clue or frankly doesn't care. The announcement today is littered with errors of both law and fact, and if acted upon will make an already disastrous situation created by Sunak's government's policies more harmful to people fleeing conflict and persecution, while continuing to profit smugglers, traffickers and other abusers. The SNP's Justice and Immigration spokesperson Stuart MacDonald chimed in with, watching both the Prime Minister and Keir Starmer attempt to outdo one another with intolerant right-wing rhetoric, shows exactly why Scotland needs independence. The SNP and the people of Scotland want no part in this deplorable race to the right. And whilst that was the topic of conversation within Westminster, the denial of the government's participation in some of the striking action over the next few days, weeks and months has led RMT leader Mick Lynch to accuse the BBC of parroting right-wing propaganda. RMT leader Mick Lynch has accused the BBC of particularly parroting right-wing propaganda in its coverage of all the rail strikes during a series of heated appearances on television and on radio. He also accused Good Morning Britain's Richard Madeley of ranting during an interview this morning. Members of the union have commenced 2 48-hour strikes at Network Rail and 14 train companies from today, and will continue on Friday, with further action planned over the Christmas period. On the BBC Radio 4 Today programme, when presenter Michelle Hussein asked Mr Lynch to put a figure on the financial sacrifice he has said his workers have suffered, he responded as follows: "What I do find annoying though, Michelle, is that you put these lines that are directly taken from the propaganda of the other side. You never show any admiration for the fight that working people are putting up in this country for the rebalancing of our society. You never criticise the super rich for what they are doing to nurses, what they're doing to postal workers, and you never seem to take an impartial view on the way this society is balanced at the moment with a complete lack of distribution of wealth in our society. You always just seem to put out anything you receive from the employers and from the government, and that's what I'm hearing directly through the filter of the BBC this morning." In response, Ms Hussein replied, "The question was about the average amount of pay lost by your members through strike action. You've said your members are making a sacrifice. What's wrong with putting a number on it?" Mr. Lynch further replied before liking the BBC's coverage to an editorial line I could read in The Sun or the Daily Mail of any right-wing press in the country with, "Why do you need that number?" I find this is a shocking stance that the BBC will take. You're just parroting the most right-wing stuff you can get hold of on behalf of the establishment. And it's about time you showed some partiality towards your listeners, to working class people in this country who are being screwed to the floor by the attitudes and policies of this government. In another interview on Good Morning Britain, he responded to Richard Madeley talking over him by accusing him of ranting and suggested Madeley should just interview himself. Also today, the CAA has criticised airports over the unacceptable level of service for disabled people. It comes after a challenging summer for the aviation industry, and despite signs of improvement in recent months following action taken by the UK Civil Aviation Authority, the CAA, a number of airports have been found to be providing an unacceptable level of service to disabled people and passengers with reduced mobility over the 7-month period between the 1st of April and the 31st of October 2022. The avian regulator's interim airport accessibility report, which assesses 16 of the largest UK airports, details those airports that have succeeded in making improvements, as well as those that need to put in place further improvements to ensure that in 2023, disabled people and people with reduced mobility receive the standard of service to which they are entitled. Earlier this year, the regulator wrote to airports informing them that the experience passengers received was unacceptable and told those who were underperforming that it expected them to do more to improve the quality of assistance throughout the rest of the summer. The CAA required several airports to put in place action plans together with airlines, which saw marked improvements in performance. The regulator also produced guidance which encouraged airports to make assistance services more passenger-focused and effective, as well as spending considerable time at UK airports this summer to better understand the challenges facing airports and to offer advice and support as appropriate. Aberdeen, Edinburgh and Glasgow were among the airports that were rated as very good for the whole period which was under review. Bristol, Leeds Bradford and London Heathrow are still deemed as needing improvement, and Luton Airport continues to be ranked as poor. And on to international news, and we hear today that Bosnia and Herzegovina have been given EU accession status. This comes with the Council of Europe approving conclusions on the EU enlargement and stabilisation and association process. The conclusions assess the situation in each of the EU candidates and partners, sets out guidelines and reform priorities, and reaffirms the Council's commitment to the European Union's enlargement policy. Following the June European Council conclusions and in light of the Commission's subsequent recommendation of 12th October 2022, the Council recommended to grant candidate status to Bosnia and Herzegovina, subject to confirmation by the European Council on the understanding that the steps specified in the Commission's recommendations are indeed taken in order to strengthen the rule of law, the fight against corruption and organised crime, migration management and fundamental rights. The Council is looking forward to a confirmation of this decision by the December European Council. The European Union enlargement process puts a strong focus on fundamental reforms in the areas of the rule of law, fundamental rights, economic development and competitiveness, the strengthening of democratic institutions and public administration reform. And staying in Europe, news today of an MEP who has been stripped of their EU vice presidential role amid a scandal involving Qatar. The European Parliament voted by an astonishing 625 votes to 1 against, with 2 abstentions, to strip Eva Kaili, a Greek MEP implicated in a bribery and corruption scandal, of her role as one of the Parliament's 14 vice presidents. The group chairs in the European Parliament unanimously voted for her removal, tweeted the German MEP Terry Reinke, who is the co-president of the Green Group, ahead of the vote. In the same tweet, they continued, "We also agreed to a full inquiry into the matter and taking further preventative measures." The European Parliament has responded decisively to the biggest scandal in its history since Belgian prosecutors announced they had charged 4 people with corruption, money laundering, and participation in a criminal organisation as part of an investigation into attempts by a Gulf state, named by the Belgian media as Qatar, to buy influence in the Assembly. Police have raided European Parliament offices and 19 private homes since Friday, searches that have yielded data and hundreds and thousands of euros in cash. Kaili is one of 4 people charged, although she has not been officially named. She has been remanded in custody and will be brought before a judge on Wednesday. Police seized computers, mobile phones and €600,000, which equates to £515,000 in cash at one home, as well as €150,000 in a flat belonging to an MP and several €100,000 from a Brussels hotel room, according to the public prosecutor. Kaili has further been expelled from the European Parliament Socialists and Democrats group and Greece's PASOK party, and Greek authorities have frozen her assets. An MEP from Cyprus governing DISI party has claimed that Kaili approached him to amend a highly critical European parliamentary report on LGBTQ and other human rights in the Gulf state. MEPs have postponed a vote on granting Qatari citizens visa-free travel rights to the European Union that was scheduled to have taken place this week. Separately, Spanish Liberal MEP José Ramón Bauza announced he was suspending the EU-Qatar Friendship Group. Such friendship groups have no official status and, according to the European Parliament's website, are sometimes sponsored by lobbyists and foreign governments. EU leaders are expected to discuss the scandal when they meet the European Parliament President Roberta Metsola on Thursday at a regular summit in Brussels. The President of the EU Executive, Ursula von der Leyen, has said the allegations were of utmost concern and promised to act on a 2019 promise to set up an independent ethics body for all European Union institutions. Back home, it has been announced that there may well be a major breakthrough in nuclear fusion. Scientists have confirmed a major breakthrough that could pave the way for abundant clean energy in the future after more than half a century of research into nuclear fusion. Researchers at the US National Ignition Facility in California said fusion experiments had released more energy than was pumped in by the lab's enormous high-powered lasers, a landmark achievement known as ignition or energy gain. The technology is far from ready to turn into viable power plants and is not about to solve the climate crisis, but scientists hailed the breakthrough as evidence that the power of the stars can be harnessed on Earth. Fusion energy raises the prospect of plentiful clean power. The reactions release no greenhouse gases nor radioactive waste byproducts. A single kilogram of fusion fuel, which is made up of heavy forms of hydrogen called deuterium and tritium, provides as much energy as 10 million kilograms of fossil fuel. But it has taken 70 years to reach this point. Speaking at the announcement today, Jill Ruby of the National Nuclear Security Administration said the United States had taken the first tentative steps towards a clean energy source that could revolutionise the world. The experiments, which were conducted at the National Ignition Facility, a vast complex at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory near San Jose, are the stepping stones towards clean fusion power. To achieve the reactions, researchers fire up to 192 giant lasers into a centimetre-long gold cylinder called a hohlraum. The intense energy heats the container to more than 3 million Celsius, hotter than the surface of the sun, and bathes in X-rays, a peppercorn-sized fuel pellet, inside. The X-rays strip the surface off the pellet and trigger a rocket-like implosion, driving temperatures and pressures to extremes only seen inside stars, giant planets, and nuclear detonations. The implosion reaches speeds of 400 kilometers per second and causes the deuterium and tritium to fuse. Each fusing pair of hydrogen nuclei produces a lighter helium nucleus and a burst of energy, according to Einstein's equation, which all of us at school will have heard, E equals mc squared. Deuterium is easily extracted from seawater, while tritium can be made from lithium, which is found in the Earth's crust. In the latest experiment, researchers pumped in 2.05 megajoules of laser energy and got about 3.15 megajoules out, a roughly 50% gain, a sign that fusion reactions in the pellets were driving further fusion reactions. The energy production took less time than it takes light to travel 1 inch, said Dr. Marvin Adams at the National Nuclear Security Administration, which will, of course, be tremendously positive news for those of us looking for cleaner energy in Scotland and beyond. And in Scotland, news today that there has been an increase in the number of general practitioners in Scotland. The latest general practice GP workforce and practice lists, these statistics were published for today. The number of GPs in Scotland is increased by 32 in the last year, with Scotland's overall GP headcount increasing by 291 from 4,918 to 5,209 from 2017 to 2022. Commenting, the Health Secretary Humza Yousaf said, "GPs and their teams are at the very heart of community healthcare. I know how hard they are working at a time of significant challenge right across our NHS. This report demonstrates we are making good progress towards our commitment to increase the number of GPs by 800 by 2027. It typically takes 10 years to train to become a GP, and we expect the numbers to increase at a greater rate in the next 5 years. Since 2019, we have funded an additional 105 placements in 2 GP track courses at the universities of Aberdeen and Glasgow, which have a focus on primary care. Alongside this, we have created a further 55 graduate level medical placements per annum since 2018 through the ScotGem programme, which will increase to 70 this year. We have also increased the number of GP specialist training placements by 35 for next year, with further increase likely to follow in the coming years. And our GP recruitment campaign remains active with targeted advertising across many digital platforms. To support GP practices, we have also recruited more than 3,220 healthcare professionals since 2018 and are committed to investing at least £170 million a year on growing primary care multidisciplinary teams. And moving from health into education, there has been a record high in narrowing the attainment gap in Scotland. The attainment gap, poverty rated in literacy and numeracy levels across primary schools, have reported today with the biggest decreases since records began, according to the latest official statistics. The gap between the proportion of primary pupils from the most and least deprived areas achieving expected levels is narrowed by 3.4 percentage points in literacy and 3.7 percentage points in numeracy, according to the Achievement of Curriculum for Excellence Levels 2021-22. This marks the largest narrowing of the gap in a year since consistent records began in 2016-17, as indeed is the first one that will be outside of the pandemic and therefore be relatable to previous records. There has also been a record increase in the proportion of primary school pupils achieving the expected levels of literacy to 70.5% and up to 77.9% in numeracy. Education Secretary Shirley Ann Somerville commented that these figures demonstrate a real recovery from the pandemic and underline a progress towards tackling the poverty-related attainment gap and achieving excellence for all of Scotland's children and Scotland's young people. This record improvement over 1 year for primary pupils achieving the expected levels in numeracy and literacy also shows more young people are getting the support they need to reach their full potential. We know that the impact of the pandemic, compounded by the current cost of living crisis, means children and young people need our support now more than ever. We are determined to do all we can to ensure they can reach their full potential, including a record investment of £1 billion over this parliamentary term in the Scottish Attainment Challenge. And the boost in education can also be seen with a boost in a record cereal harvest in farming in Scotland. The Chief Statistician for Scotland has released figures on the 2022 Scottish harvest that show it was a record year for cereal yields. Total cereal yield is at a 20-year high, rising 14% to 7.6 tonnes per hectare in 2022. Production increased by 10% from 2.9 million tonnes in 2021 to 3.1 million tonnes. Despite a small reduction in sown area levels for cereal production, these are the highest since 2014. Of course, prolonged hot and dry conditions in spring and summer favoured a remarkably early finish and low moisture levels. Above average yields in 2022 more than compensated for a small decrease in the overall sown area of cereals. This decrease was largely driven by reductions in spring barley and oats. The sown area of spring barley fell by 5% from 2021, yet high yields resulted in a 17% rise in production. Oats were the only crop to fall in production. A 20% decrease in the sown area of oats resulted in a 9% decrease in production compared to the previous year. Winter barley, wheat and oilseed rape saw increases in sown area. Coupled with the best yields reported in the last 20 years, production for these crops exceeded the 10-year average. High yield combined with a 7% increase in sown area resulted in record production for oilseed rape at 151,000 tonnes. And staying in the rural economy, Scotland's strategy to tackle the nature emergency draft has been announced. Protection for Scotland's nature is set to be urgently scaled up, with 26 priority actions to restore Scotland's natural environment and halt the loss of biodiversity by 2030. The Scottish Government's draft biodiversity strategy sets out a long-term ambition and vision for what good looks like for biodiversity in Scotland in 2045. It is designed to deliver landscape-scale transformative change, backed by evidence, supported by a delivery plan and a new investment plan, and underpinned by statutory targets, which will hold future governments to account. Priority actions will focus on accelerating nature restoration, expanding and improving protected areas, supporting nature-friendly farming, fishing and forestry, recovering vulnerable species, and is based on the principle of tackling the nature and climate emergencies together. Speaking at the UN Global Biodiversity Summit, COP15 in Montreal, Canada, Biodiversity Minister Lorna Slater said, "Just like climate change, the loss of species and degradation of our natural environment is an existential threat to humanity. And just like climate change, the action needed is both urgent and transformative. That's why the Scottish Government is clear that this is an emergency that requires an emergency response. We are already investing in our land and its seas through our £65 million Nature Restoration Fund, the expansion of our nature networks, the establishment of a new national park, and by highly protecting at least 10% of our seas. But we know we can do more." The strategy sets out a nature-positive vision for Scotland, one where biodiversity is regenerating and and underpinning a healthy and thriving economy and society. A new investment plan, coupled with ambitious statutory targets, will be crucial to achieving that vision. The strategy, which is still a draft to ensure that the final version reflects any agreement at COP15, follows a period of consultation. A final version of the strategy will be published in 2023 alongside a detailed delivery plan. Well, that's it for this evening, but before I go, as always, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated already and everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, can we thank you very, very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford, even in these times, £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. And if you have enjoyed any of the programmes that we have produced and put out on air, and you're on any social media platform, could you please make sure that you let others know, and we build this platform into something which not only can we be proud of, but we are going to have a free-to-air platform for those of us who wish to have a programme of which we can be mainly proud. But from me, Donald C Stewart, here at the studio in Broadcasting Scotland, on behalf of everybody who's with me, good night, and thank you very much for watching.